Welcome to the Inside Pitch. I'm Christopher Lockhart, the creator and administrator of this Facebook group where screenwriters, creators, filmmakers meet to ask and answer questions and exchange ideas and information on the craft and business of movie making. As always, I am joined by the empathetic. You're very empathetic, Ramesh Santanan.
Hey guys, hi Grace, how are you?
Of course, I've been slaughtering your name for like a year now. Why don't you just remind me exactly how to pronounce your last name again?
Oh, it's Santanam.
Santanam. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. You know, I'm
There's
just the ugly American.
There's a H that doesn't exist in there after the T.
Okay.
Right.
I'm learning. You know.
Yeah.
Thank you for your patience this last year.
Oh. I've never been. It's even people who say Santanam or Santanam. It's fine with me. So, you know,
right.
I get called Santa Man.
Well, with the holiday season coming up,
yeah,
that's not such a terrible thing. And by the way, we should say that this is our last live interview for the year because we're going to shift into our logline season because we have our annual logline contest coming up.
Right.
And so there'll be news about that in the coming weeks. But right now we're dealing with Halloween.
Right.
And so who better to have it at Halloween than our two guests today? Which, by the way, I will say that I did go back and edit that 69 to a 65. Inside thing for anybody who maybe caught my little mistake. But at any rate, let's waste no time because I know that everybody's really excited. Let me see some of those comments. People already throwing in questions.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We have some people from Iowa that are excited. People from Jersey even. Jersey, man, let me tell you, screenwriters come from everywhere. So, all right, let's do the introduction, Ramesh.
Okay. Without further ado, we are thrilled to have filmmakers and screenwriters Scott Beck and Bryan Woods with us today. They first met as sixth graders in their hometown of Bettendorf, Iowa. After discovering a shared interest in cinema, they began collaborating on stop-motion movies with their Star Wars action figures. This collaboration continued into high school, where they directed several shorts and their first feature films. They burst onto the Hollywood scene with Paramount Pictures' A Quiet Place, based on their original screenplay. The critically acclaimed box office smash was released on April 6, 2018, and stars Emily Blunt alongside John Krasinski, who also directed. It was certified fresh with a score of 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the film earned more than $340 million at the box office worldwide and was number one at the domestic box office for 2 weeks. They serve as executive producers on the film in addition to co-writing the screenplay with John Krasinski. In 2018, Beck and Woods were named to the 10 screenwriters to watch list by Variety. For A Quiet Place, they were nominated for Best Original Screenplay at the 2019 Critics' Choice Awards and the Writers Guild of America Awards. They won Best Film Screenplay at the Saturn Awards. The movie won Best Horror Film Release at the Saturn Awards and the Critics' Choice Award for Best Sci-Fi or Horror Movie. Next up for Beck and Woods is Sony Pictures' sci-fi thriller 65, with Academy Award nominee Adam Driver set to star. The film is an original screenplay written by them, which they are directing and producing, and they will reunite with Sam Raimi, who is also producing. Beck and Woods wrote and directed an episode of the horror anthology series 50 States of Fright, executive produced by Sam Raimi, streaming on Quibi beginning October 2020, and the episode entitled Almost There is about Iowa's frightening folklore and stars Taysa Farmiga and Ron Livingston. Fox snatched up Beck and Woods' horror pitch, The Boogeyman, based on Stephen King's iconic short story of the same name. They wrote the screenplay and will also serve as executive producers on the film. The short story, first published in 1973 and later released in King's 1978 collection Night Shift, followed a man who's recently lost all his children to a creature lurking in the closet. King himself gave his endorsement of A Quiet Place, tweeting that the film, quote, is an extraordinary piece of work. Beck and Woods also co-wrote the sci-fi drama Sovereign for Oscar-winning actor Mahershala Ali and director Mark Munden, based on the original draft of the script by Greg Weidman and Jeff Tuck. The film will be produced by 21 Labs. Other credits for the duo include 2019's well-received thriller Haunt, which I love, by the way, which they wrote and directed and produced for Eli Roth, Sierra Affinity, Broken Road Productions, and Nickel City Pictures. The film had its world premiere as the opening night film at the Popcorn Frights Film Festival and then its international premiere at Fright Fest in London. Momentum Pictures released Haunt in theaters in September 2019, and it was the #1 most watched movie premiere on Shudder. In 2015, Beck and Woods wrote and directed Nightlight, a supernatural thriller released by Lionsgate Entertainment. The film was produced by Herrick Entertainment and Oscar-nominated producer Michael London. Beck and Woods subsequently developed another feature for Lionsgate written by Mark Heyman and produced by filmmaker Darren Aronofsky. As teenagers, Beck and Woods were shortlisted as 2 of the top 50 directors out of 2,000 applicants for Ben Affleck and Matt Damon's Project Greenlight series on Bravo. While in college, they caught the eye of MTV Films, which offered the pair a feature film development deal. The duo went on to write and direct an originally scripted pilot for MTV and executive producer David Gale, and were later listed as the top 100 writers on The Verge by trackingboard.com. Beck and Woods are members of the Directors Guild of America and the Writers Guild of America. Everyone, please welcome Scott and Brian to the Inside Pitch.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Guys. Wow, let me tell you, that bio has more pages than the first draft of A Quiet Place.
It needs a rewrite, a heavy rewrite.
Yeah, it needs some editing, that's for sure. Sorry about that.
No, it's great. It's great. It's great to it's great to hear all the nooks and crannies of somebody's career, because there's so much goes on other than just what people see on an IMDb page. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I hear that, and I'm just like, there's a lot of failure in there, even though it's listed as like, you know, our credits. It's been a lot of stumbles to get here.
So at any rate, welcome, and we're really excited to have you here. And I guess there's a lot to talk about, but I just love the personal story that you two have known each other for so long. So you're, in a sense, you're almost like brothers.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way. I mean, we've known each other since we were like 11 years old, and we were friends before filmmakers, and like we have the same, you know, sensibilities in life. And I think that helped us kind of, you know, coalesce our love of storytelling into something that we were on the same track with throughout middle school and high school. And we're able to, you know, luckily still maintain that friendship and the creative partnership to this very day, you know, 20 some years later, 25 years later.
With, I'm sure, a few bumps, huh? Come on, you guys have to argue occasionally.
It's like once a project, maybe. So
wow, that's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
It's interesting. I mean, arguing and debating and you know, having those creative conversations is very much a part of our process. It's basically what we do. You know, it's you kind of throw ideas up against a wall and fight them out and see which is best. So yeah, it's part of the partnership.
Well, I know you guys are sort of well rehearsed in talking about your upbringing in the business. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about sort of your career, your inspiration, sort of your backstory prior to A Quiet Place?
Well, I mean, our backstory, I'll try to give you like the Cliff Notes version of it. But, you know, Brian and I always were enamored with the art of storytelling. And so like very, very early on, literally when we were like in elementary school, we were, I think both independently, we didn't know each other yet, writing short stories or novels or plays that we would put on in grade school. And in middle school and high school, we started transitioning over to using our home cameras that our parents had, bringing our friends over and trying to like script out movies, whether they were short films. We did some ambitious feature films for like $50 that were absolutely terrible, but that was kind of our film school. And the one thing that we always were mindful of back then, and still to this very day, is looking at the resources around us and then trying to utilize those in terms of the script that we wrote, or you know, the set piece that we could pull off on no money. And to a certain degree, like that's the same way that we approach writing A Quiet Place. But up to that point, there were a lot of stumbles. I mean, literally, you know, writing 30, 40 screenplays in high school and college. Once we got out of college, none of them ever saw the light of day.
That's a lot of scripts.
A lot of scripts, a lot of bad words on the page, and getting close to like getting representation at times. And then we had the meetings and it just completely fell through, and we still didn't get representation for years and years after that. And so it just was like the tenacity of perseverance, but also trying to have a very, very objective view of our own work so that we could be like, this really sucks. Like, this isn't working about it. How do we make it better? And that's very easier to do when you have a duo, because we're a sounding board and we try to be honest with each other. And frankly, that's probably why we've made it this long, because we're trying to really strengthen each other in a means to an end to strengthen, us as a duo. So.
Sure, because I could imagine at times when you're facing all of that defeat, that it's nice to be able to commiserate with somebody. And perhaps each one can kind of serve as a buoy to the other when they need it.
Yeah, we seem to have this magical quality where if one of us is really depressed, the other one is not. They're pumping the other person up and be like, nah, don't worry about it. So yeah, it's really nice to have a shoulder to cry on to help you get through those.
I truly believe that the best writing teams have exactly that characteristic, where they are sort of polar opposites at times when they need to be emotionally. Because I think when both are down, there's some serious crashing and burning happening. But I just love the idea that you've been doing this since you're 11 years old. That is younger than my son. So it is amazing to me. And then of course you have all this amazing success now, and a movie, for example, that people love and that people respect also, because it's a smart movie. And so these short films and these 30, 40 screenplays that you wrote, they really did sort of serve as your education to take you to A Quiet Place?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the, I think about one of the moments in our career in retrospect that felt like a turning point. And this was about 12 years ago, where we had written, these 30 screenplays, and we're just like, it's not working out for us. Like, we can't seem like we can get the leg up. And we were like, let's just write a short film. Let's write something again with the resources that we have. And we were able to bring it back to Iowa, raise a little bit of money to make it. But essentially it was a movie with hardly any dialogue whatsoever. And it was a pre-apocalyptic movie. Like, you watch this movie, it's like 15 minutes long, and the very end of it is basically the end of the world. And you realize this is why this character has been doing all these strange things up to this point, because he's trying to get somewhere before the end of the world. And I look at that, and that was a building block for a couple of reasons. One, it was no dialogue whatsoever. And we already, at that point, this was like 2008, 2009, we were already trying to figure out what the kernel of the idea was to do a silent genre film that eventually became A Quiet Place. But it also was like taking all the cards into our own hands, meaning that we were fighting with things that were out of control. We were fighting with scripts that we were sending out into the world, but not getting any feedback on. And we finally were like, let's write something that we have at our disposal. And, we also put on the director hat. So that's one thing that, gives us a little bit of leeway to go off and make this. But, we have so many filmmaker friends that are just writers, and they're tied in with directors. And so it's kind of the same thing. You look at your network, you look around, you look at somebody with similar sensibilities, and you can get things off the ground. And for us, that short film was kind of a pivotal point. We were able to get that into a festival. We were able to sign with the manager. We then went off and wrote a feature script, and were able to get that greenlit. And so there were a lot of moments that we thought we were going to admit defeat. We're going to hang up our writer hats. This career is done. But every moment that you kind of look around you and see another opportunity through your resources has always been kind of the buoy that we've needed to move forward.
So talk about the evolution of A Quiet Place. Where'd the idea start?
Yeah. Well, I mean, like Scott said, we were kind of noodling with this idea of a silent film. We've always felt like movies should be movies. And we've always tried to find stories in our screenplays that feel like they couldn't be anything else. They couldn't be a book. It couldn't be a TV series. Like what's unique to cinema. And so we often look back to silent film. Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin, many greats in that era. And even like more not contemporary filmmakers. Well, I mean contemporary filmmakers like movies like Gravity or recent movies like Dunkirk. But before that, like Kubrick, what he did with 2001: A Space Odyssey, and we were just enamored by these kind of pure cinematic experiences, and we were wondering if we could somehow come up with a premise that would be the ultimate version of a modern day silent film. And so we were noodling on this, and kind of out of college, we had this idea about, unrelated to that, we had an idea about a family on the farm that had to be quiet because there was something out there that was going to get them if they made a noise. And it was just that kind of kernel of an idea. And we were kind of like, it was just one of those sticky ideas, just kind of kept coming back. We keep journals. We fill them out with hundreds of ideas a year. Usually 95% of them are not great. But the ones that stick around, the ones that we keep talking about, usually end up being the stories you write. And Quiet Place is one of those. We just kept coming back to it. Okay, well, there's this family on a farm and they have to be quiet. Why do they have to be quiet? Well, maybe there's monsters outside. Maybe there's like an alien invasion. Okay, a family on a farm with aliens. Is that interesting? Well, it's not interesting yet, but what if one of them, what if they're like kind of struggling with something, and this idea of being quiet is a metaphor for something? Okay, and then you just kind of just keep developing it from there. So we just kept adding piece by piece, and eventually got to the point where we're like, all right, family on a farm, can't make a noise. What's the worst possible thing that could happen to them? What's the worst scenario really in a world like that? And that's when we came up with the idea for the mother is pregnant and they're about to have a baby, and there's nothing you can do to keep a baby quiet. And so when they have that baby, it's kind of a ticking time bomb. And once we had all those ingredients, we ended up writing it as a 10-page proof of concept. And it was all the major beats of the movie and story condensed into 10 pages, just to teach ourselves if we're excited about the idea, B, could we get it to work with no dialogue? Could we tell the story with no dialogue? Dialogue is such a crutch when it comes to exposition and backstory and character. And we just wanted to prove to ourselves that it was something that was doable. And then once we had that and we felt good about it, then we started turning it into a screenplay.
I love the way you brainstorm that. I used to share this excerpt from a book that spoke about the way Todd Browning worked with Lon Chaney Sr., where they would just start with some kind of idea. Like, okay, how about you have no arms in this movie? Like, okay. And then it's like, so like, why wouldn't you have arms? And they just would brainstorm exactly the way you did. And sometimes it can be fairly ludicrous, but it does create a lot of unity. And so, like when she's pregnant, you're just like, oh my God, you're like you have to be kidding me. Like there's just like the worst thing that could possibly happen, right? Even though it's kind of important for them to have this baby, right? So it's brilliant. And then of course, the idea that we have a character who is deaf. So talk about the evolution of that in this story.
It started from two places. So first and foremost, like Brian and I grew up in Iowa. We had a really great friend who had a hearing impairment, and so there wasn't anything like in terms of significant other than just seeing the way that he had to adapt to life, and there was like he was the only person that we really knew with a hearing impairment. And so we found that, fascinating how he was so tenacious and able to like get through life with certain things that we take for granted that he was able to, overcome in his own way. And years later, we were writing a script. It wasn't A Quiet Place. It was a spec that never ended up seeing the light of day. That was a modern day take on the Pied Piper story. And in that story, we're like, what happens, when all the kids are taken away, but there's this one child that is actually deaf. And so he's the one that's not lured away. And he kind of became the hero of the story. That movie took a complete dead end. But when we were gestating all these ideas for A Quiet Place, we started thinking, this might actually be the story where we can use that character and really like bolster that to be hopefully a very like realistic 3-dimensional character that means something and has weight to it. And so developing that, we started realizing, that's one of the reasons this family actually is able to adapt when this invasion happens, because they were already, adept at communicating with nonverbal communication, with American Sign Language. And so everything snapped together. So that's kind of going back to the process that Brian was talking about. Like, you just put your antennas up and you have all these ideas circulating you, good, bad, or indifferent, over the course of years in our instance. And you start piecing together the ones that actually make sense logically, but also hopefully have emotional weight to them. And that was the core thing in this story is, the character of Reagan, played by Millicent Simmons, was so instrumental in terms of the entire story, having her own arc. Each of the family members we tried having their own arc throughout the story, and letting them each have their strengths and weaknesses, but hopefully the weaknesses would actually become the strengths.
And Scott, I think you touched on a couple interesting things there in terms of process, which is one, drawing from our real life and real life experiences, which we feel like is always a thing that people should do. If you can kind of empty your gut onto the page and make it real and true to your experience, usually the work is a little stronger. But the other thing is that we're not shy about pilfering good ideas from bad scripts that we've written. And when you look at your work like that, it's kind of exciting because there's no wasted time. There's not one script that you could write that is all for nothing, even if it doesn't get set up, or maybe it doesn't win the screenwriting competition, or maybe everyone thinks it's terrible, but there might be like one idea in there that's really cool that you can develop later and make stronger and put it into the right project once your skills get a little stronger. So that's something that I wanted to mention too.
Why let it go to waste?
Yeah.
So Ramesh wanted to share some pages.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you guys, if you could talk about when you approached A Quiet Place writing it, because I remember when I first read the script like before the film came out. I remember getting it and opening it up and first seeing it's 67 pages, and then go through it, and it's such an exciting read. You realize even if it's only 67 pages, there's a full feature film in there. But also some of the examples you use to sort of build tension on the page, which was crucial, I think, to making it, to making the read really good. And that's sort of what your approach was to that. If you share a few pages, like the initial thing of where he's walking, and then the next page, you just sort of went with, this is all you were doing. You were just writing like one line and then 3 words, and then I think it's like 10 feet away, and then you just have like 5 and then snap.
Yeah.
Which is, honestly, it would send a lot of, and then, I see contest readers going up and saying, you shouldn't put afternoon in a slug line. You shouldn't, all that stuff.
Oh, you're kidding me. Every internet screenwriting expert is saying you never do this kind of thing. Never, ever, ever, ever.
Right.
And you know something? Guess what? Thankfully, a lot of people follow that advice, because then when Beck and Woods do it, it's innovative, right?
Yeah, right. It's funny. I remember writing this section that you're highlighting, the kind of like 10 feet, 15 feet. And Scott and I had talked about A Quiet Place as like, wow, we really want it to be a visual read, and we want it to, you know, look a little different, feel a little different. We didn't know what that meant, but we just like, we kind of kept pushing ourselves to think outside the box. And I remember we kind of, I was like noodling on this like separate page thing, and I sent it to Scott, and I was like, I don't know about this. Like, I don't think this is what we were really talking about. This is a little out there. And Scott was like, no, it's, you know, the only thing you did wrong is like the font needs to get bigger each time the pages go. And so like he wanted to lean into it even more. So we kind of just kept, you know, nudging each other and trying to get weirder and weirder with the style on this.
Honestly, like there was a degree that was built out of being self-conscious about the idea not working if it weren't visual on the page. And part of that was from, we had like a general meeting at a studio, and I almost want to say it might have been at Paramount of all places. And there was an executive who was like, what are you working on next? And we kind of pitched the nascent idea of it. Oh, it's about a family on a farm, and they can't make a sound, so there's hardly any dialogue. And we were pitching that thinking like, oh, isn't that cool? There's no dialogue. And they're like, man, that's going to be really difficult to read. That sounds boring. And all of a sudden we were like, oh shit, like, is this script not going to work out? And so I think we started thinking about the script from a standpoint that this needs to go into the hands of executives at a studio. It needs to go into the hands eventually of producers or filmmakers, cinematographers. And we knew at some point we were going to have to transition the script over to a shooting script, where you strip out all the eccentricities to it. But up until that point, we knew because there was no dialogue, you have to make this feel as cinematic as possible on the page. And so that involves, you know, throwing the kitchen sink into the script with the fonts, with putting images in there. And of course, we were familiar with all these so-called rules of like, you're not supposed to do that. But we, at the end of the day, were like, what services the story the best? We still have to exercise some restraint. And there were times that we did pull certain things out, but like we felt this would be the best representation for a story that lives and dies as a suspense movie, but also a sound designed movie.
Right. And like this scene where you use the Monopoly page, it sort of, because you explain it, but then you open it up and go, oh, now I know exactly what you guys mean on the page. It makes sense. How important was it that, because it was going out as a spec, that when you wrote in this style, that it had to, you know, you did it to grab the reader first?
Yeah. I mean, we knew we needed to grab the reader, but it also is like we had to grab them without the gimmicks too. Meaning, you know, in the first 5 pages, you essentially have to set up, here's the character, here's the family, here's you know, the mother who's pregnant, and also like here's the threat that exists on the farm. And essentially, like, if we could get all those snapping together in the first 5 pages, hopefully we were going to be able to grab the reader. And one of the things we also did in conjunction with, you know, the images and the single words on a page was trying to adapt like a very sparse writing style. At the time, we were looking at like Dan Gilroy's script for Nightcrawler that just is very like flows on the page so well. You can't put it down.
Slug lines. No slug lines.
Right. There's something beautiful about that because it just like encaptures you in the tone of the movie, and all of a sudden you're at the end of the movie and you've experienced the story. So for us, we were like, how can we do that? So every single word was a choice, and at times, you know, if somebody weren't reading carefully, it may read like a treatment for a film. But for us, it was like all of that will be put on screen as long as you're getting the characters, the arc, the story, and the suspense of the movie, and most importantly, the emotion that hopefully lands at the end of the story.
You know, when I read Nightcrawler, I didn't even realize that there were no slug lines in it.
Right. Yeah.
Sure,
it's sneaky. Yeah.
Right. And so again, it really speaks to the fact that ultimately, when people are really looking at scripts, they're looking for the story. They want to be swept up in the story and whatever it is that you have to do to communicate that. So as Ramesh joked earlier, that some people get angry if the word afternoon is used in the slug line. When I read a script, I don't even notice, like, I don't notice those things. You know, I'm not going to go to Denzel Washington and say, yeah, we have to pass on the script because it uses afternoon in the slug line. It's ridiculous. So, so for me, it really is about the experience. And so obviously reading something like this, it was quite refreshing. because you see so much of the same thing over and over and over again. But I agree with you that ultimately the story still had to be there, and most importantly, the emotionality had to be there, which of course your script has both, does so brilliantly. So yeah, so like you guys really, it was like the perfect storm here. You did everything right, even though it was very risky. I mean, putting a Monopoly board picture, it's risky, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
only because there are purists out there who would be offended by that kind of thing. But I always say that ultimately, people who are really, truly trying to find material are not going to be offended by these things.
Yeah, I think they just want to read. I think they just want to read or see something cool. And then, and when it came to that, we just had to use our own gut and look at it and go, okay, do we like this? It doesn't seem cool to us or not. And
always figure out, like, is there agency behind like the moments that we're choosing photos? So for instance, like we have the Monopoly board on here, but that's in part because it comes back later and we see the Monopoly board where we're establishing the geography of everything around the farm and where they have to go because the pregnancy happens. They need to distract the monsters with the fireworks. And so it kind of literally sets up, a board of the geography. And in a contained story like that, that was important to us. We felt like that was important. The same way that the slug lines that nobody ever reads, I agree. But we were like, this is a real-time story. And so we're trying to chart the trajectory of the day. So you're going in line with the story if you need that in order to, appreciate the story. But again, it's like we had to really police ourselves, but at the same time, we let ourselves a little bit of a leash that certainly could have hung ourselves. Luckily, it was not the case.
I think that a lot of writers overlook the fact that they are, or at least they should be, in my opinion, writing a script for the reader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately that first line of defense that they have to get through. While yes, you of course wanted to convey a movie, obviously, which this does, but you really do want to not burden the reader too much. By the way, I have read plenty of scripts that use no dialogue. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I thought was just so brilliant about your script was that it truly felt organic. It really made sense why these characters couldn't talk. And there was a lot of suspense built around it. Where other scripts, it just felt gimmicky. It didn't feel organic. And so here, it's like, wow, like this is like, again, this just gets it right. It just does it all so well and so smart.
Well, thank you for saying that. Appreciate that.
You guys are smart. You guys are smart.
No, we're not, but thank you. Thank you.
Yes, you are. Yes, if I say you're smart.
But I do think you're right that to a certain extent, like these scripts they're for the reader and they are, unfortunately or fortunate, I mean, however you look at it, but like the script ultimately is a sales tool. Unfortunately, I mean, like you're right. I respect a script as a piece of literature as well, sure. but it is a sales tool. You have to, you need something that a series of people are going to look at and go, okay, I can see the movie, or I can imagine it, or this feels like something that I can invest time and money into. So you are selling the reader as much as anything. You're selling them an experience. You're selling them a movie. So and that's how we try to look at these things. Every script we write now, that's in the back of our minds. That it needs to be in a weird way. It's like the first piece of marketing for the movie. Mm-hmm. The title is the title is a part of the marketing. Is it a cool title? Does it feel fresh? Does it feel cool? It's like all those little things you kind of have to think about as a writer.
Was there any concern when you wrote it like this initially, when sending out, you guys realized you were doing something that is not, for the lack of a better word, traditional or typical? And was there any sort of sense of dread on your part when you sent it out like this initially? Or?
That's interesting. I'm trying to remember our state of mind. I mean, before we had sent it out, we had gotten reads from our close circle of trusted readers, some of which don't even work in the film industry, but they're always a gut check for us. And the response we got was emotionally, they were like, I'm so invested. It wasn't about the images on the page, it was about the emotion. And we we're like, oh, okay, that's great. That's the response that we need. And then we vet it with our, manager and our agents, and there wasn't any reticence on their part. And so we thought we at least got past that step. There also was, we wrote this knowing worst case scenario, we'll just go back to Iowa. We'll try to crowdfund like $100,000 and try to make this movie on a friend's farm. It's all about sound design. Like, it doesn't have to be intensive visual effects. And so we felt a little bit like we were, we had given ourselves the resources, again, going back to what I had said earlier, like we had the resources around us to make this movie. And if we knew that, then we felt like there was no chance if the studio system says we don't want to make this movie, that we would feel defeated, because we would go off and make it. So I think there was a bit of arrogance of, feeling invulnerable from that standpoint. So, and
there was never a moment, just to be crystal clear, there was never a moment where our reps said, "Oh no, like what is this, bizarre format?" Like no one ever questioned it. No one really talked about it. Our agent, I don't remember them saying anything about it. It was just another script, and the first producer it got sent to came on board. The first studio it got sent to bought the script, so there was no like reticence once it went out to the marketplace either. All the reticence was about the concept and can you sustain a script with no dialogue, and like that's where all of our anxiety came from. And when we would like pitch the idea like loosely to people, nobody seemed to think it was as cool of an idea as we did for a movie, and that like most of our insecurity came from that. Like, oh, is this like not as cool as we thought it was? But
how many?
Once it was a script, people got it.
Did you get someone here asked? How many, did you get a lot of no's before receiving a yes? And if you did receive no's when you pitched the project, did you change anything in your pitch for the next time you pitched it?
Right. So again, it wasn't the only no's we got. There wasn't a formal no, and we never formally pitched the thing, but we would take general meetings with different production companies. We would kind of loosely pitch it to certain producers we were working with, and even certain like studio executives that we knew. And so when it was just verbally, when it was just us sitting in a room going, yeah, we're working on this thing, it's about a family on a farm, there's these creatures that blah, blah, blah. Like when we went into it like that, it always felt like people's eyes would glaze over and they would not be very interested in it. And that made us insecure about the idea. Part of the problem is, maybe we weren't pitching it very well, or maybe it just didn't make sense. So like, that's where the no's came from. Once it was a script, people seemed to get it right away. Once they could kind of see it on the page, it made more sense than, I guess, what we were trying to explain to people.
Yeah, and it went like directly into Michael Bay's company, and that's where our journey taking it out started, and that's where it ended, which is not the typical experience.
Because Michael Bay is very, very well known for making quiet.
Yeah, he's very subtle. And that's the exact reaction that we had, where we did not think of them as like, oh, that's the first stop, but that is the benefit of having a team of people like a manager and an agent, because they have their finger on the pulse.
You guys at WME at the time?
We were at William
John
Morris.
was a client, and obviously Platinum also. So
yes, so they knew internally, like this is the temperature of the business. This is the temperature of Platinum Dunes, and knowing like John's interest and availability. And so it actually did not get packaged when it went out. It was just Brian and I as writers, and we took that out. Platinum Dunes really loved it, and they took that directly into Paramount, where they had their Michael Bay has his deal. And so it happened way too easy compared to other scripts that we've taken out, where you can literally get 30 no's and 0 yeses. And so we're still very grateful for that. But again, I think like for us, we were just trying to write something that we felt very passionate about, but hopefully connected emotionally to people, and also was an easy read, a quick read, not a high budget film. So there was like a low risk to it, given how we were trying to be a little different in terms of not having any dialogue in this movie. What
was the budget actually? What did the budget end up being?
I mean, I think it didn't have the A-list salaries attached to it, but it was somewhere in like the 17 to 22 million dollar range, which, initially when we wrote it, we were like, if this is a studio film, this could be $5 million. It could be $8 million. Like there's an economical way to scale it. And I think that was also in the back of our minds when we were talking about this movie, like it is scalable. So you're not forced into making this a 60, 80, $100 million movie.
Right. Ramesh, there's some other things that you want to point out on?
No, actually, no, the only other thing was the last page on that. It's, how you guys used it, but I like the image, that I really like that bit, the worst dimensional thing in there. But the last image on this, because I liked how you used, you were not scared to use images like the little button there, but, or use weird fonts like a little child had written it. And you guys did all this before Final Draft could use images, because you had to like work around it. And then this one, which I really like, because you sort of say this how tall 330 feet is.
Yep.
Yeah, how did we do this, Scott? We had to use like a PDF.
It was a pain in the ass. It was through Photoshop.
Spaces in Final Draft, and then after the fact.
It was like every time we had to kick out a new draft, it was basically like 5 hours of reformatting everything, which was horrifying. So when it was time to like, let's change this into like more of like a traditional shooting draft, we were kind of happy about that.
Right, because now of course it's all easy. You just push the image into Final Draft.
Yeah, it's much easier now. Yeah.
So someone else here asks, what was your thought, Joshua? I'd love to hear your thought process regarding the creation of the monsters.
Yeah, so like the monsters, that again was one of those things from a story standpoint that we knew. This is the concept that if you make a sound, you die. And so obviously the monsters have to have superhuman hearing. And so it was a lot of discussions that Brian and I had about like, who are these monsters? What do they hear that they respond to, and what becomes white noise to them? Does a human noise or organic noise actually attract them after like months or years of being on this planet, and they just kind of tune out mechanical noises? How do they interact? What are they as a biological entity? Meaning, like we would do research on sonar, on the way that bats respond to things. And so it was a lot of collecting this information and then being judicious in terms of what's important to the story and what's important for the characters to know. And much of the story, we always said like, it's kind of got a kinship to a Twilight Zone episode where you're just dropped in the middle of something and the audience has to catch up to speed, but the characters are firmly rooted in on the situation that they're in. And so we kind of were beholden to that. So that meant like, there shouldn't be really a giant expository dump in terms of like, who are these monsters, what the situation is. And you should pick up on little pieces, hence the mythology coming through in, newspaper headlines or, little writings on the wall, just to keep it as economical as possible. And feeling also personally like it's okay to have questions as long as those questions don't come at the expense of the, understanding the story and the characters.
Yeah, in fact, Ramesh shared in the group a note from an executive who wanted the backstory. And in defense of that executive, who was not me, I could understand how some might, because that is a very fairly typical note, right?
Yeah.
And but I agree that sort of in your world, it didn't feel all that necessary.
It didn't feel necessary. And what's funny is like I'm remembering like those notes in the past that we did, passes of the rewrites we did for the studio, and there were scenes in there where it was like, oh, here's the invasion event, and that ended up like kind of evolving into what you see in if anybody's seen the sequel, like in terms of like the small town, we see these events happening across the world, and then inside the town of the Abbott family. But we felt ultimately in the first movie, like it just needs to be contained. It is what it is. You're living in the present. That's one of the evolutions from the spec draft to what the movie eventually became. Just really keeping it point A to point B, you're with this family in real time, and hopefully there's like a momentum and excitement and suspense about that.
I produced a horror movie where I fought with the writers all the time because I felt that we absolutely needed a little bit more backstory because what the killer was doing was so ridiculous. It's not like he was just Michael Myers who was just killing people. This guy was using traps and just, you know, all this like ridiculous stuff.
Right.
And I was like, we need a tiny bit of information. And to their credit, they were like, absolutely not. But I could tell you that probably 50% of the critics agreed with their choice and 50% did not.
Sure.
But so it's definitely a creative decision that you have to make. And but when you look at your story and sort of all of those elements and that world, like we get it. You know, they are aliens who are attracted to sound, and they're going to kill you if they hear you. That's really sort of all we need to understand. We don't have to know when they came, why they came, or even what's happening outside the farm, because that adds to so much of the suspense.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the tricky things. I mean, you know, writing and story is so subjective. You never really know. I mean, there's not a review of A Quiet Place like from an average Joe, or like when you do like a test screen, you like ask people's opinion. Like there's not one person who doesn't say, well, you know, where did the aliens come from and what's going on outside? Like everybody does want to know that question. And so it is challenging to police yourself and really know, are you making the right decision? Because everybody says they need to know this information, and they say that that's a barrier to them liking the movie more. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. You really don't know. It's such a mystery. Even, you know, every project it seems like that we're working on, you anytime you have kind of a bold, slightly outside the box, idea, always got to gut check yourself and figure out, are you doing something that is bad for the audience and the experience, or is it okay that they have questions and you leave some stuff out of the story?
Right. Yeah. It's are the questions good questions or are they bad questions?
Right.
Yeah.
And
Well
that's
said.
sort of the question that you have to ask yourself. But again, when it comes to the story, you guys, your instincts were pretty dead on. But the story evolved a lot from your screenplay to what we eventually saw. So can you talk a little bit about the development of it, the evolution? John came on as a co-writer, also as a director. How did you feel about him directing it? I'm not sure. Had he directed anything prior to that?
Yeah, he had directed 2 films.
Okay.
What was crazy though, I mean, the story, I'll kind of give you the short version of the story, but so we had the film set up at Paramount. We were in the midst of doing some rewrites on the script per the studio's notes, and we got this crazy call out of the blue from our agents, and they're like, look, John Krasinski read the script and he absolutely loves it. And he gave it to Emily Blunt, who flipped for it. And we were like, were they just hanging out? Like at the time, we didn't know they were married. Like that was not within our celebrity knowledge. And then we found out like, oh, and what's more is they just had their second child 3 weeks before reading the script. And so it hit them at the most vulnerable time to be a parent, where you're trying to figure out like, how do I keep this child alive? And that metaphor just rang so true for both John and Emily. And so John was like, I want to star in this. I want to direct this. And as a director and also a writer himself, you know, he needs to be able to put this movie on screen. And so we knew we had this project set up. We want to see it just made. And the movie had a release date with John and Emily. And so John came on board. And, you know, part of the process of being a director is being able to imprint your own values into it. And so for him, like doing a pass of the script was absolutely critical. And as directors ourselves, like we've had to do that and totally respect that process.
And So there was a sequel for which you did not write, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
we were
right.
not involved in that.
We went off and wrote a new thing, the thing that we're working on right now. But yeah, it was weird. It was like
Did they go to you first?
they did approach
like
us.
contractually, didn't they have to go to you first? Or
Yes, and the producers approached us, but at a certain point, but. To us, and this is just us, we're alone perhaps on an island, but for us, we're a little, it's not that we don't like sequels, because we love sequels and we go see them, but our dream has always been like creating kind of original, I don't mean original like oh it's so original, I mean like original like things that aren't based on other things, other movies. It feels like the movie marketplace right now is almost exclusively remakes and sequels and on. And so our dream has always been to try to like be able to come up with some new things and try to push those movies through the process, because it's getting rarer and rarer. So that was kind of the we were so grateful that A Quiet Place actually connected with people who felt like it was an opportunity to kind of push some new stuff out. But it was fun. It was like so fun for us to see the sequel, and John and those guys did such a great job.
and get paid for it too. Let's not.
Well, I'm not gonna send the
I
check
hope you
back.
got some of that like Evan Darby money. You remember Ramesh, how much? Remember that? Evan
Yeah,
Darby, right?
it was
The guy
for
got, like,
Huntsman, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he had some
Oh.
like crazy payday, whether he wrote the sequel or not.
Yeah, and I mean that was the funny thing is like they announced the sequel before I think ourselves or John had a moment to even process. Like it literally was like opening weekend, and we got the call like, oh, Paramount's greenlighting a sequel, and like Brian said, like for us, one of the best parts about the Quiet Place process was the writing process, meaning we weren't on the clock for a producer. You're writing this on spec, and so that gave us the time to collect our ideas and really put it on the page in the best form possible before we would expose that to anybody else's eyeballs. And so we were like, we just want to go off and, replicate that process to the best of our abilities. Like, it's not about a paycheck. It's about what the passion is, what the movie is. And so that became the script for 65 that, like Brian said, we're in post-production on now. But I don't know how else to work, because we've done things, whether they're assignments or whatever, where you just don't have the passion and you burn out so fast. And that's not just burning out on that project, but it's potentially burning out in a way that affects your love of this career or your longevity of this career too.
But there had to be maybe just like a little bit of sort of having to let your babies go a little bit.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it was letting our baby go when John came on to begin with, and when you sell it to a studio, I mean, it's all letting your baby go.
Right.
And it's, it's not something that you cope
with.
The
best you hope is that everybody that is working on the movie has the right sensibilities. And I think that was the one thing that we had some comfort knowing the studio and John and Emily, and even like the sound designers, Ethan and Eric and Charlotta, who is the DP, like they all got the sense that first and foremost, this needs to be a story about family. Like, it's not just a horror film. It's not just a suspense film. Like, it needs to have an emotional backbone for people, audiences, to even care about what's going on screen. And so we knew from the get-go, like everybody had the same sensibility, and that gave us the comfort that, the people we had to hand the baton off to, so to speak, were going to see this through the end, to the best of their abilities. And we're still very proud of all their work. They did amazing.
Can you talk a little bit? Can you talk a little bit about your process of how you work together as writers? Do you each take scenes? Do you first of all, do you outline or do beat sheets, and then do you say, I'm going to do these scenes, you're going to do these, and then switch over? What that whole process is like?
Yeah, so we like to outline. The first act usually has more in-depth outline that we kind of figure out together in a room. Like we'll sit down with each other, we'll pull out the marker board, we'll throw ideas down, we'll kind of beat it out until we're comfortable and we feel like, okay, we know what the first act is. And then the second act, a lot murkier, a lot more, we think this happens, we think that happens. Here's a major turning point that's important in our story where everything kind of goes wrong, or whatever it is in any particular given case. And then the third act is very nebulous, but we have a vague idea. Like we know it's all kind of built, like in the case of A Quiet Place, we were like, we know it's all going to build up to him, the father, sacrificing himself by telling his children that he loves them. Like we knew that that was the ending because we thought that that would be
Spoiler
poetic, spoiler alert, sorry if you haven't seen it, apologies. But we knew it was going to build to that, but we didn't know how we were going to get them there, but we knew that that was the destination. And then of course they'd have to defeat the monster somehow, but didn't really quite know how. And then once we have that foundation, we feel comfortable getting into pages. And the reason we don't like to have more specificity in our outline than that is because we love it when our characters start making decisions and start doing things that we didn't expect. In the case of a project that we wrote and directed called Haunt, which is this horror film about a group of characters that go into a haunted house during Halloween time, and it turns out everything is real, and the horrors that are happening in this Halloween.
It's great.
Haunt. Thank you. Turned out to be real, and what was fun about not being too rigid with an outline in that movie is our villain characters kept making decisions that we didn't expect, and every time Scott and I got bored with the writing of the project, we're like, this is starting to get kind of paint by numbers. It's starting to feel a little familiar. All of a sudden, one of our characters would do something. It would turn left instead of right, and it would send the story off in a more interesting direction. So we like to have that freedom. And then the nitty gritty of it is once we start writing scripts, it's like, I'll take 5 pages or Scott will take 5 pages, and then they'll work on that. And then we'll send those 5 pages to the other person. And then they'll rewrite those pages, add another 5 to 10 pages, send it back. And we just kind of hopscotch back and forth. And so what that does is you're continually in a process of rewriting and refining and working on the material that you have as a foundation. And you go over it and over it again, and you talk to each other, and communication's a big part of our process. Every time Scott reads my work or I read his, then we talk about it and we go, well, what did you like or what did you not like? And how did it hit you, and what's a better way forward? And it's all about, for us, all about communication and kind of competing, having a competition of ideas and pushing each other to do something more interesting than maybe sometimes the work is.
What about, I'm going to ask I ask the tough questions. What about writing on your own? I mean, Abbott and Costello broke up, right? Not everybody stays together forever. Do you ever have the urge to, maybe I would just like to write this script by myself? Have you written scripts on your own over the years?
Yeah, I mean, initially, like back in middle school or high school, like we were writing, our feature scripts essentially by ourselves, meaning like Brian would do a full pass of the feature, then he'd share it with me once it was done. And then we would discuss it. Maybe he'd do a rewrites and I would do the same. And there was a point where we realized like our writing process would be so much stronger by bouncing these ideas off each other earlier. And so there was a point where we started joining forces. To this day, I unfortunately or fortunately feel like I will be inept if I'm working by myself in a vacuum, because I'll always be questioning, is this the best version of what this could be? Like, what would Brian think? How do I make it better? And so I feel like we've kind of forged in a way that is almost codependent. And if I die first, I hope Brian can write on his own perfectly fine. I'm sure he can, but I know if he goes first, then I need to retire. So yeah.
Listen, I think that the relationship, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So
right.
It's like you guys know your strengths. I think it's brilliant. You guys might be one like the tightest writing team that I've ever known. I'm serious, and I'm like, it's really impressive.
How do you guys direct together when you're like 65? You directed together. How?
Yeah. It's the same as writing. It's communication and talking through everything. We storyboard the whole movie together. So that we can, just like writing a script, you storyboard the movie, put it on paper, debate every single scene, debate why is the camera over here, why do we want to do it, and it's odd. It's like funny because when we first started directing, it was more like Scott and I would go through together in the room every single scene, and now it's gotten more and more like our writing process, where it's like, okay, Scott is going to take page 1 through or scenes 1 through 5, and he's going to storyboard those. and I'm going to storyboard scenes 10 through 12 or whatever, and then we'll flop and we'll send them over to each other, and then we'll scrutinize them and debate them. It's gotten like oddly similar, but it's the same thing. It's really just communication. When we're on set, we have like this invisible umbilical cord between the two of us, where we're always like kind of next to each other. We talk to the actors together and the crew together. We always have to be on the same page, because if one of us misses a conversation, then all of a sudden they're out of the loop. So we try to stay next to each other. And but film is so collaborative that it's kind of uniquely positioned for, I think, filmmaking teams. It makes sense, because even if you're doing it by yourself, which is totally fine, but if you're doing it by yourself, you're still going to end up working with a lot of other people and taking in their ideas, and so it's not that odd.
Was working as a team a bigger challenge with the pandemic going on, and also you shot a movie during it too, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's never easy to make a movie, even harder to make it during the pandemic. You know, a lot of it in pre-production was working remotely. And so both Brian and I, whether we were in LA or back in Iowa, we were piped into, you know, our production designer, our visual effects team remotely. Being on set, you know, was very restrictive for, you know, the fact that we had to make sure everybody stayed safe. We didn't want anybody to get sick. You know, they didn't want the movie to go down. And so that was very challenging, very stressful, just from a health standpoint. And then post-production is kind of the same way as pre-production, where sometimes we're in the room personally, whether it's with the composer or with our editor. But other times, like, we're working remotely. Like right now, Brian's in LA, I'm back in Iowa. And so luckily the interfaces for all this communication is up and running for everybody, and it helps make it easier. But I think we do miss, you know, the days when like everybody could be in the same room, you know, safely all the time.
Do either of you have significant others? And if yes, how do they feel about your partner? Because it seems like it's always
many marriages. Yeah, we have many marriages. Not that I'm on my fourth wife. No, I'm saying like Brian and I, it feels like we have a marriage, but then it's like, because Brian's married, I'm married, like we also have to like get along really well with the significant other, because frankly, like I think Brian and I probably spend more time together than we do with our wives.
Right. Yeah.
And luckily, like my wife, I've known her since I was 14 years old, and Brian's known her basically since 16 years old. And she was like our actress and producer. And so she's very ingrained in what it is, you know, that we have to do day to day in this crazy, you know, circus lifestyle that we have. And then Brian's wife works in the film industry as well. So luckily there's not a disconnect in terms of what the demands are of this job, but they're, not only are they incredibly supportive, but they are also the people that we test our work with first. Like they're the ultimate gut test, because they're going to be brutally honest and let us know if something is absolute garbage or if it's not working, and how we can do better. So.
We had like that proof of concept that we described for A Quiet Place, where we had this little 11-page script that was just sitting in a drawer for literally 8 months. Scott and I wrote it, and we're like, all right, that was interesting, moving on. And we were like, we moved on to like 10 other projects. And then one day we were in between projects, and we were like, hey, Christy and Julia, what do you think of this weird little 11-page thing that we wrote 10 months ago? And they were like, drop everything you're working on. This is the only thing you should be talking about. This A Quiet Place thing. It's so much more interesting than the other projects. So we rely, they're a part of our process in a weird way. Like we rely on their taste as well.
That's awesome. Thank you for answering that. Mr. Ramesh, what's the
someone here wants to know, Annie wants to know, do your reps tell you to focus on horror thriller only, or are you now empowered enough to spread across genres if you choose?
That's interesting. I mean, I'm trying to remember if there was ever like a moment that they specifically said, you know, focus on the genre, because I feel like Brian and I were focusing on the genre. Like our favorite blend of movies, like we love every single type of genre and movies, from, you know, French New Wave to, you know, the latest like Eli Roth movie. And for us, like the sweet spot comes for us when we're writing, like, how can we combine genre with something that's, you know, completely left of center? And that's why A Quiet Place, we talk a lot about not just like the obvious inspirations of like Alien or Alfred Hitchcock movies, but Buster Keaton and Jacques Tati, like, and try to find a place in between. And so when anytime we were writing something, it felt like it was in the genre, whether it was horror or thriller or suspense, it was somewhere in between. I think, you know, looking forward, Brian and I still want to play in that sandbox. Now we look outside and we're like, maybe there's a wild swing to do where there's like some weird take on like a biopic or something. But I think at the end of the day, like, the movies that we love now might be the movies that we love making for the rest of our lives, and they'll be in that similar lane. The same way that, you know, Hitchcock, you know, never really strayed from the movies that he ever made. He was a master of that genre.
Was there, someone here wants to know, Dennis wants to know, was there a seminal horror film you saw as a kid that inspired you to become horror writers? Or was there an author you read?
There was seeing The Sixth Sense in theaters opening weekend when I was in middle school was a big moment for me personally, and I'm sure it was for Scott as well.
You were in middle school. Oh my God. Oh my word.
We had been writing movies and making movies before that, but there was something about that movie, probably just because it's one of the great screenplays of cinema history. I don't know. There was something about it that was just so magical that it really felt like, it felt like a calling almost. Like seeing that movie, it was like, man, it would be would be amazing to try to make an audience feel that way about a movie someday. And it was really inspiring. It was like kind of like a 1999, like, and it was a great year for movies, not just The Sixth Sense. I mean, it was like Fight Club and Magnolia and like all these incredible movies coming out that year. It was just inspiring to be a movie lover, and then it kind of it made us want to take it more seriously.
Well, you know, the emotional journey there, right? It's such an emotional movie.
Yeah.
Despite all of the other stuff and the twists, but it still comes down to that journey. Again, a lot like your movie. So I can understand some of the similarities.
Yeah, we've been ripping off M. Night Shyamalan for a long time. He's one of our heroes. He's a master of brilliant high concept story and great emotional character journey within that story, and as well as a master of sound and cinematography and all these other important cinematic elements. So yeah, just definitely trying to rip him off as much as possible.
Well, you're doing a damn good job of it. So, you know, let's face it. People know A Quiet Place. People love A Quiet Place. It's a movie that will inspire other writers. So there are people who were in middle school when they saw A Quiet Place, and I guarantee you that they're going to come to the film business because of it. I suspect that probably makes you guys feel good.
Yeah, it makes us feel old also, just thinking of that.
Now, take it easy about the old, okay? Because when he was in middle school, I got in with my senior citizen discount. The Sixth Sense. So I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Actually, the last time I went to a movie with a friend of mine, we walked in and the girl behind the counter says, "Is that senior citizen?" And we're like, whoa.
Oh man.
Nerds.
Okay, thank you. It's like Annie wants to know, was the original intent in A Quiet Place to show the aliens as, quote, attracted to sound or food source or eradicating sounds that hurt them? Was that always like you'd have the aliens and they were always going to be attracted to sound?
Yeah, it was tied, very specifically into the concept. So there wasn't really another way to do it. And I think for us, the challenge, especially on the page, is communicating like the rules of what it actually could be attracted to. And so there were, mechanical noises that we were like, okay, rule wise, like it's not attracted to that. But if somebody makes like a sound that feels human, that's what they're attracted to. Or if you put on music, you can mask the noise so that they're not able to hear that. So it's a lot of like figuring out the rules within those setups.
Somebody's asking, I've been told that horror scripts tend to be the easiest to get financing because the horror audience is extremely large and loyal. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so it kind of, it's not, horror is a great entry-level genre. And the reason why is because it's the one genre that is the star. Meaning, when you go see Mission Impossible, the star of that movie is not the genre. It's not action. The star of the movie is Tom Cruise. The star of the movie is the franchise Mission Impossible. But horror is the star. People go to horror just because it's horror. So it's a great entry level genre because you don't need to. You could be nobody and get a movie made because you don't need Tom Cruise or whoever to be in the movie. And there's just also a history in that genre of making low budget movies as opposed to perhaps action, which is maybe a little bit more expensive to do. So that's why I think that's why it's a good entry level thing. And I think that's why it might be a little easier. Getting a movie made is challenging no matter what, but it's maybe a little easier with horror sometimes.
One of our members is suggesting a documentary you might want to see. It's just look, just the recommendations that come from our members.
Yeah.
A documentary about Boris Karloff recently released in the US.
Cool.
Is one that you might like. Actually, I have to tell you, I just spoke to two friends who saw it. They didn't like it at all.
Oh.
So I don't know what to tell you.
We'll make up our own minds.
You go make up your own mind, especially if you're a Karloff fan.
Big fan.
So,
I love Boris Karloff. Speaking of Boris Karloff and low budget films, Peter Bogdanovich, one of our favorite filmmakers, Peter Bogdanovich, who went on to do Last Picture Show and What's Up Doc and a lot of amazing movies. His first movie was Targets. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is a great film.
Shot in
It's
San
a low budget,
Valley.
low budget Roger Corman style film, and
Right.
so many of our favorite filmmakers like Francis Ford Coppola or Jonathan Demme or all of these heroes kind of came up with low budget horror movies. So there you go.
Roger Corman started a whole bunch of careers.
Yes,
He really did.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
course.
You know?
Including Ron Howard, I think, right? Didn't
Yeah.
Ron Howard?
Right.
Yeah.
John Sayles. I think John Sayles
yeah.
probably got his start with him. Bogdanovich. I think Coppola, Scorsese might have worked with him.
Scorsese, yep.
Yeah,
Scorsese,
you know.
Bertha.
So another question here. Was it a conscious decision that the couple would choose to bring new life into that dystopian world? Or did that come as part of the writing?
It was, yeah, that was certainly a question like we asked ourselves. We're like, is this believable? But for us, like the crux of the story was about loss, but overcoming that loss. And the question was, why is this family still alive? And there's kind of a couple answers to that. One, they were adept because they already had somebody that, had hearing impairment in their family. They were able to communicate non-verbally, but also like they were the family that had something genuine between them. Like when push comes to shove, like they will always connect together. And it was so important for us to not fall into what we call like the post-apocalyptic traps of creating your story, meaning like we've all seen like Walking Dead a million times, and we know what that aesthetic is and what those storylines usually are. And so we wanted like early in the story, a scene that we wrote that is in the final movie too, where John and Emily are dancing together. And we felt like that was an important benchmark to show you like this isn't just despair and dread, like there's something genuine in terms of the connection here. And in conjunction with that, the deliberate nature of having a child, given all the hurdles, like for us, that was a metaphor for their love and their admiration for each other and their yearning that there can be a future in a place, in a world that otherwise might feel completely hopeless.
Here's a review. Somebody wrote, an entire paper could be written about how A Quiet Place is prophetic of the idea of managing through a global crisis as we have to do now in the pandemic.
I have to read that paper. Yeah. I feel,
Look at that.
I feel like it's funny to now look back in retrospect, and I'm like, oh yeah, some people come together and then the rest of the world kind of burns in the meantime. So.
Right.
So what can you tell us about 65?
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
Right?
That sucks.
It's just like, it's like A Quiet Place. Like, we wrote that and it had like nobody, even when that movie was getting made, like nobody was tracking that movie. Like our hope was the trailer will come out and people will be like, where did this come from? What is this? And hopefully lean into the screen and be very intrigued. And so it's very much kind of the same thing. So there's unfortunately not much we can say other than it's coming out next May 13th, 2022 with Adam Driver. So
Adam Driver is truly one of our great up and coming actors. He is tremendous.
Yeah.
I mean, really tremendous. So what was it like to get somebody like him in
mind blowing? Mind blowing.
And then you're directing him, right?
Yeah, we have no qualifications to be able to direct him, but it was when he agreed to do the project, it was one of the best days of our life, and literally I just couldn't comprehend it. Still can't really comprehend it. But he's just a great artist, and he's very he's got a wonderful work ethic, and he cares a lot about the roles that he takes on and the movies that he's in, and he just cares. He's somebody who cares a lot, and that means everything, because sometimes you work with people who don't, it's just like, oh, you just want to be famous, or you just want to, you know what I mean? Like there's a whole there's a whole nother side of this business that they just want a paycheck. It's like they got into the thing for the wrong reasons and don't really care. They're not passionate, and that's not him. He's very very focused, very committed to his craft, which is really cool to see.
Can you talk a little bit about taking notes and how you approach them and how you look at notes, and which ones do you choose to do and not? And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the note like that's like a skill set I feel like we had to really like learn, because I know early on, like before we were professionals, but we'd send out our scripts for feedback and we get notes back, and you just get that like gut in your feeling where you're like, oh my God, like I'm a terrible writer, or some of these notes are just infuriating, and there's a mix of emotions that always come with that. And we evolved to the point where you look at a note and you have to know you don't have to take it verbatim, meaning like sometimes the note is picking at the layer of something that is actually broken further underneath, and you have to do your own investigation yourself to really discern what that is. Like that's the job of a writer. Because it's also very difficult to give notes. Like if you're in the position of an executive or if you're a producer, sometimes you're trying to communicate something, but you just don't know what's wrong, but you just know something is wrong. And so you have to also respect the other side of the table that's giving you those notes and let it be a conversation. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong most of the times. And you just have to come to a consensus. Luckily, we have two of us that we can really break apart a note and have discussions about what it might be before, engaging with the producer, the executive that might have given that note. But it requires some patience. And sometimes it requires just knowing there's a long game to it, and you have to try the note. And sometimes it won't work, but other times it might actually make your project better, even though initially you're like, this is never going to work. And that's what we try to give ourselves some allowance to try those things.
John Robert Marlowe made this comment. Although I believe it's Brian with a Y, but we'll let that slide. It was one of the best days of our life, not lives, plural. That's a team.
That's funny.
So that's, yeah.
And Annie wants to know, can you tell the story about the first moment, pre-agent, that your writing paid off? Meeting, sale, whatever, that game-changing moment you guys had.
Yeah, what would you peg that as, Scott? What's the game?
I was just going to ask you the same question.
Isn't it funny how it's hard to do that, right?
Yeah. Because there's not one moment. I think that's what like a career in the filmmaking business is like you don't know what that game-changing moment is until you look back in retrospect, and even then, it's not like one discernible moment. It's a bunch of like slight variations in your journey that turn like 2 degrees this way, and then it just keeps going that way or back. I think to a certain degree, it was when we had sold our first script, this movie called Nightlight that we wrote and directed, and it now sits with a wonderful 14% on Rotten Tomatoes. So that was like one of those situations that you look back and like never would take it back, but like it was such a learning experience for so many different reasons. But getting that first sale certainly felt really special because it unlocked us being able to finally like get set up with an agent. We were able to join the Directors Guild, and we felt like professionals. But I will say what was interesting about it is even though all those like things happened for us that we were always waiting for, it didn't necessarily give you a sense of accomplishment. Meaning that there's so many things that you look in your future, like, I hope that I get this movie made. I hope that it gets seen by an audience. I hope it makes money. I hope I win an Oscar. Like all these benchmarks for yourself. When you start going through them, you realize those aren't the ends to the means. Like the journey is really the most important part. And that's one thing that Brian and I constantly try to remind ourselves, that when we're writing a script, just in the pure writing vacuum, and we accomplish 5 pages of writing in a day that we thought we were only going to get 2 pages out, that's a game-changing moment for us. Like, because you keep putting one foot in front of the other. And I can't stress how important that is, because if you're only waiting for like those so-called perceived game-changing moments, they're not going to necessarily bring the fulfillment that you hope.
Yeah, we talk about how like the most fun, exciting moment of A Quiet Place was, in retrospect, now that we've like had the full experience, the movie got made, it performed well, they made a sequel. In retrospect, the most fun and exciting part of A Quiet Place was writing A Quiet Place. It was like coming up with cool ideas and putting it on the page and showing up and writing and that, I guess what I'm saying is like that doesn't really change. Like that's always like the part that we look forward to, is just doing the work. It's the work. That's what we love. It's why it's so fun to do. And it's it's stressful, and it can be lonely, and it can be depressing at times too. I don't want to paint a picture of it's always a joy, but it kind of is. I don't know. We just really love it. We just love doing it, making movies.
I think a lot of aspiring writers sort of think it's like winning the lottery. Like they go into a store and they buy a ticket, and a week later they win the Powerball.
Right.
When it's really not. Somebody had a nice analogy here. They said there's small moments that snowball into something bigger, and I think that's really is an accurate way to probably describe most success in this business.
Yeah, we're in the process right now. I hopefully we'll get this out before the end of the month. It might be November or something. We're going to be releasing a book that's the Haunt screenplay, but in conjunction with a bunch of journal entries that we have throughout the process of like, it starts when we set up A Quiet Place up to when Haunt got released in like late 2019, but it kind of charts all the different projects that we've been working on, and we'll see. We're going through like the editor's pass, so we'll see how much makes it into the final book. But there are all these
that
journals
sounds great
that we keep throughout the ups and downs. And honestly, like it usually feels like mostly downs, just because you constantly hit rejection. You constantly like we wrote a pilot script for MTV, and we kind of talk about this in the journals. And the day we handed the pilot into MTV, the main executive at MTV had left for a different job, and so the pilot was automatically dead. And like you were just spending, spending months and months and months
of work. Yeah. So we hope we'll have to post about the book when it's out, because I think people will. Yeah. It's a peek behind the curtain of the kind of roller coaster, and as Scott said, it's usually things are going not well, just because that's the film business for whatever reason. Usually things are not going well, and then every once in a while there's a little peak of inspiration.
Well, we will definitely promote that book. That's
thanks.
That's for sure. Oh yeah.
Was Haunt written in pretty similar fashion to A Quiet Place? I love that film, because that was like when you when you wrote, because I remember watching it and like there's actual suspense and dread.
And was 65 written in the same sort of stylized way as A Quiet Place?
There's a degree that I think Brian and I can't escape the style of writing that we like to do. I don't feel, and Brian, tell me if you feel otherwise, that we ever like go as full tilt as we do in A Quiet Place. But what we always try to do is like be economical about the words that we're putting on the page, so that it's very, very clearly communicated what the idea is. But it also is something that people can read and hopefully like get through without feeling belabored. Haunt was a project actually we wrote simultaneously with A Quiet Place, and we were writing both in a vacuum, not knowing that either of them would be made. You know, usually the batting record says you're not going to get either of them made. And Haunt was kind of the answer to the antithetical of Quiet Place, meaning A Quiet Place was this kind of quiet, emotional, suspense movie, and Haunt to us was like a throwback to John Carpenter movies, like just doing like take a B movie premise and lean into it and just make it a roller coaster from point A to point B. And so much of the writing of Haunt was thinking about set piece and thinking about set piece through character, and when can you bring out the character and when do you need to just like let the audience just, ride the roller coaster down the hill, so to speak.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Scott. And I think I think the 65 script maybe a little bit more outside the box. But yeah, they both do have some odd choices in formatting things. It's just fun for us to play with. But always in service of the story or a scene or a concept. Never very much try to not let it be a gimmick. It's usually like we're setting up an idea that we need the reader to visually understand, and then that's going to pay off in the third act. And so that, like, if there's an image or something, it's there for a reason. It's part of the storytelling. It's not just like, oh, wouldn't it be cute to have a weird font choice here? It's usually like in service of the story.
Yeah, that's
it's
someone here.
How it hasn't caught on though, because it's like the way Shane Black, the way his whole sort of gimmick caught on, and so many people wanted to mimic that voice. And it's interesting that I don't see what you're doing more often. I see links in scripts sometimes now, but still nothing to the extent of A Quiet Place. It's I mean it really belongs to you. It really does.
Well, we're just standing on the shoulders of all the great writers that came before us, like Dan Gilroy or the Walter Hill, David Giler draft of Alien. Like, those are the things that we look to for inspiration, just as fans of the craft. And, we have many other friends of screenwriters that are always recommending scripts. And it's just beautiful to see everybody like develop their own voice, but you can't always say, it's yours and yours alone, because there's, so many, literally hundreds of years of like theater and now movie writing that we're always looking back to.
Well, you guys are very modest, and so allow me to maybe sort of blow you up a little bit more. I think now there are a lot of people that are going to be standing on your shoulders. So it's really sort of a beautiful evolution, and you guys are like so cool and just so sort of down to earth that I'm overjoyed for your success. I really am. I think you're being a little modest. You guys have really contributed something through your voice that nobody's done before. I mean, honestly, I've read over 60,000 screenplays. Nobody has done it. So maybe you can say, well, Dan, that's all bullshit. This is what you guys did. This is like your thing. So I say congratulations to that, because you have brought something new to the screenplay, something that we haven't seen before. I think that needs to be said.
Well, it's very nice of you to say, and I can't imagine how tired your eyes must be after 60,000 screenplays.
But not when I read a script like yours, right? That's the thing. So, Ramesh, do we have any final?
Yeah, there are a couple of questions here. One is, speaking on this, are there any do's and
Ramesh
don'ts?
will never let you go. Ramesh will never let you have 80,000 questions. Are there any do's and don'ts in using visuals in a script? And then also sort of off of that, you had said earlier that there were some formatting things you considered but shied away because they may
possibly going too far. Can you share what a couple of those were?
The ones we shied away from, I don't think I'll personally be able to remember. It was just it was case by case. Sometimes our manager would even be like, I don't know about this one guy. It's just too gimmicky. Like if it just didn't feel part of the story or it felt like we were showing off, that's where we were like, let's get rid of it.
But I think that's the do's and don'ts also in so much that like if it's just in there to be cool, like that's not good enough. It's the same way of like directing and framing a shot. If you're framing a shot because it's cool, like great, it makes a pretty picture, but is it furthering the storytelling? And so again, like I point to the Monopoly image as something that might feel gimmicky maybe the first time you're seeing it in the script, but the idea behind it was you come back to it as a point of reference for the geography, so the family can like plan, their routes around the farm, and therefore there's agency behind it. So that was kind of the gut check that we always had.
Yeah. And someone here, Lisa has a question. If one has received notes, rewritten their scripts many times, and are happy with it, how do you know it's ready to send out?
Yeah, it's kind of when you're happy with it and when you have, we talked about this earlier, but we have kind of like a inner circle of readers where they're kind of our sounding board and we feel comfortable when they're excited about something. We know we're ready. We know it. We feel like that's when it's ready to get out. And those are the people oddly in our minds almost when we're writing scripts. Like Stephen King talks about this idea of having an ideal reader in his mind. I believe for him, it's his wife, and he's writing, and that's the audience, and he's hoping that she responds to something. So we have our group of people, and when it feels like they're excited, and when it feels like we're excited, that's when it's right. And then of course, we have managers and agents, and we get their opinion, and and usually they have a good sense of the marketplace, but we're not always on the same page. I mean, sometimes they think, oh, this needs a lot of work, or this isn't ready yet, and we just disagree, and and they go with what we feel, because it's at the end of the day, it's our career. But you use all of these people as a gauge of if the work's ready. Did I answer the question, or does that not make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, finding that network of people that you trust, that you can share your work with, I think is really important. And for those of you who live in the middle of nowhere, you can now, because of the internet, you can reach out to people utilizing social networking. A group like the Inside Pitch, for example, just reach out to people who seem like they're smart to you, and say, hey, would you read my script? And building a little bit of a network. I think it's kind of crucial, because you can't exist in a vacuum. Not in this business, you can't.
Absolutely.
What is it about the horror genre that you guys were attracted to? What was it that you sort of
I think,
and you're writing in it still?
Like I remember when I was 5 years old, I would go over to my uncle's house outside of Chicago, and he loved movies. He was a giant movie buff, and there was this one moment that has burned into my memory that he had a VHS tape, and he was like, "Do you want to see something scary?" And as a 5-year-old, that's horrifying to hear. And he popped in this VHS tape. I was also intrigued, and he showed these little clips from like Alien. It wasn't the whole movie. It was just like a small burst, whereas a chest burster scene. And then it transitioned to the RoboCop sequence where the guy gets like dumped with acid and his skin just starts melting off and he gets hit by a car. It's like a bunch of these scenes that were horrifying. And I realized early on that the horror genre is really adept at provoking you. And sometimes that can provoke you in those visceral ways where it's just like, it's gore, or you feel it's, viscerally in your bones, or it can provoke you in a way like Night of the Living Dead or Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where they're not just like these so-called B-movie premises. They also Trojan horse in, important socio-political commentaries. And that's what's great about the horror genre. Not every horror film has to have some deeper layer to it, but I think that's what we kind of love about it. And also, there's nothing better than sitting in a movie theater pre-March 2020, when you can be with a packed audience and go through the roller coaster ride of the way that a horror movie is kind of manipulating you and putting you on pins and needles or horrifying you, and hearing that consensus of degree from the audience. And sometimes when it's not working, you're hearing that even louder. And so as a filmmaker, that teaches you, like you can be very educated by when things aren't working in a horror movie, because it's very, very obvious. So I think we love it both as a fan and both as filmmakers, because it teaches us how to make horror movies work.
I think that's why a movie like A Quiet Place will have longevity, because I think in 30 years there will be a metaphor somewhere in society that we cannot yet foresee, that people will say, oh, wow, this is totally reflecting what's happening now. Just like that comment earlier about the pandemic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And one last question here.
All right, go ahead, Ramesh.
What's your writing schedule like? Do you guys write every day?
Yeah, it just depends what we're working on. We try to be diligent. You really have to, we're big believers that you have to show up for the page, that that inspiration likely won't just strike automatically. It helps if you show up and get the computer open and you start working and writing, and then the ideas will flow. So you got to show up for it. At the same time, our writing is at its best when we're having fun. So we also don't try to force it. Like if you're really not feeling it, and you just need to watch a movie or go back, to the well for inspiration, then that's okay. Try to not be too hard on ourselves. If you're just not feeling, you're not feeling it. So are we writing every day? I mean, it just depends. So like Scott, what would you say? Like if we're writing A Quiet Place, are we writing every day? What are we doing?
I would say we're writing every day, but writing means many different things, obviously. Like it's not just literally putting the words down on paper. Like it can be coming up with random ideas while you're walking your dog or whatever. Like you again, it goes back to like putting your antennas up in the world and collecting these ideas and letting your brain either deliberately think about the ideas, or you go off and do an activity and subconsciously, those ideas might come to you, and it's important to like always be jotting those down and being receptive to those. Even if it feels like a bad idea at the time, it may not be a bad idea. So we try to like keep that part of our brain on, every single day. And sometimes you show up and the work doesn't come, but the fact is, like, as long as you're showing up, that's the most important thing, because the whole thing of like wait for inspiration to strike, like that's bullshit. Like it's never going to strike.
The other thing we like to do, and this can be a bit of a trap, so I hesitate to put this out there, but we like to write two different things at the same time. And so in the case of A Quiet Place, it was A Quiet Place and Haunt, and you're writing them simultaneously. And what's nice about that is if you get bored or stuck on one project, jumping to the other one can be really freeing and exciting, and this other cool thing, and now I'm working on this and I can't wait to get back to that other thing. That'll be really fun. And so it kind of makes the process a little bit more fun. You can kind of distract yourself. The only reason I would caution people with that is it is a little dangerous, because you start pilfering ideas. You start going, oh, well, like I like this idea just a little bit more, so I'm going to take this cool idea I wrote for this one and bring it over here. That's kind of messy. You don't really want to get into that if you can avoid it. So it helps because there's two of us, because while I'm like, if I'm working on Haunt, Scott can be working on A Quiet Place, and then we can swap two scripts. So maybe it's a little bit easier with a partnership, but it's something to consider.
And it also, I think, helps that if you are faced with a little bit of writer's block, whatever that may mean, you just move to the other thing, so you always feel productive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's really great. Like one of the best pieces of advice we could give for a career in film is have many irons in the fire. Have lots of irons in the fire, because it's challenging to get a movie made, and it helps if you have a few projects going at once, because you just never know. It's like having an extra lottery ticket.
Back to that lottery ticket.
I don't mean it like that. It makes it sound like it's too much.
No, it's all good. It's all good. All right, so Ramesh, can we end it now?
Oh yeah, yes. Yes.
Yes. I don't want to make you angry or anything.
No.
Okay.
This is great.
Gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough for taking time out on a Saturday morning or afternoon, wherever you may be, to meet with our group Again, you guys are seminal writers, whether you know it or not. And I look forward to 65. I look forward to your book. I look forward to an incredibly long career. Given the fact that I'm so much older, I may not be around for all of it, but I'm going to be around for a lot of it. So from the group, from Ramesh, from myself, thank you so much, Brian and Scott, for being with us today. I cannot thank you enough.
Thank you guys. This has been fun. Yeah.
Great questions. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning
everyone.
in.
Thanks.